It started with a smirk, no press conference, no quote, just a 12-second clip of Kylian Mbappé chuckling during a question about David Beckham. The reporter had asked if Mbappé saw any similarities between himself and the English icon. The laugh that followed wasn't cruel, but it wasn't respectful either, and the football world noticed within an hour. The video had gone viral. Mbappé mocks Beckham began trending across platforms. Some called it a harmless grin. Others, something colder, a signal that the new generation wasn't just ready to take over, but ready to forget what came before in elite football. Silence often screams louder than any speech, and Mbappé's chuckle said everything. He didn't explain it. He didn't walk it back at that point. He didn't have Mbappé was at the top of the sport. World Cup winner, national hero, golden boy of Paris, the marketing face of an era. If he laughed at Beckham, it didn't feel like arrogance. It felt like gravity shifting to many younger fans. Beckham wasn't a legend, he was a logo, a faded brand from the 2000s. The face on a cologne bottle, the haircut their fathers copied, relevant in commercials but distant from the game. But to Beckham, that laugh landed like a hammer because he had heard it before. The dismissal he had been doubted when he joined Madrid, when he left for Los Angeles, when he focused on business while still wearing a captain's armband. They said he was too pretty to be tough, too commercial to be committed. And each time, he answered the only way he knew how, by enduring. Now, decades later, he was being laughed at again, not by critics, but by the crown prince of football, and that changed everything. Beckham didn't lash out. He didn't tweet or post a moody black and white photo. He didn't call a friend at Sky Sports. What he did was far more strategic. He started showing up, not loudly, not with fanfare, quietly, subtly. Training grounds, tunnels, boxes at matches, a lunch with an executive, a casual tour, a handshake with an old coach. Nothing overt, but enough to be seen, enough for Mbappé to notice. There's a famous shot, a still frame from a PSG match day. Mbappé is coming off the pitch. Beckham is walking toward the tunnel. Their eyes meet for half a second. Neither man blinks. The tension was real. The headlines that followed wrote themselves. Football Twitter exploded. Some sided with Mbappé, calling him the present, the future, the one rewriting the rules. Others defended Beckham, not just as a player, but as a symbol. The last bridge between tradition and global fame. Between grit and gloss. For a few days, it felt like the sport itself was split in two. But Beckham wasn't back for a feud. He was there for something deeper, legacy. And all it took was a laugh. Beckham didn't need to say a word. The world was already listening for years. He had occupied a strange space in football. Not quite retired in spirit, but no longer active on the pitch. He was a brand, a businessman, an ambassador. Yet now, after one laugh, he was back in the spotlight, but not as a victim. As a presence. His reappearance wasn't accidental. Every step seemed intentional. He began attending PSG training sessions more frequently, always in the background, always just far enough to avoid stealing the scene, but close enough to be noticed. Mbappé, ever aware of optics, never addressed it. But the tension didn't need words. It hung in the air like static. There was a moment, caught only once on camera, when Beckham and Mbappé crossed paths inside the Parc des Princes. Mbappé walking off the pitch after a training session. Beckham entering with sunglasses and a phone in hand. Neither man flinched, neither smiled, and that single frame went viral. The internet dubbed it the cold pass. Edits appeared online with dramatic music and freeze frames. Legacy versus ego, icon versus influence, YouTube football versus VHS era. What started as a laugh was now an undercurrent of something far more gripping, a silent battle for the soul of football itself. Mbappé, for his part, stayed composed. He was still scoring, still dancing in celebrations, still breaking records, but something had shifted. A stray comment in an interview, a photo caption that read louder than intended, a celebration that seemed just slightly forced. The always calculated image now seemed to falter, just slightly. Beckham did the opposite. He didn't react, he curated. He released a short-form documentary, not about himself, but about the history of English footballers abroad. The narrative focused on adaptability, resilience, and carrying legacy into hostile environments. He never named Mbappé, but the subtext was as sharp as a studs-up tackle. Then came the podcast, in a rare long-form appearance. Beckham was asked what he thought of modern players being more brand than athlete. He paused, just long enough, then said, quietly, some build careers, others build campaigns. It wasn't petty, it was surgical. The internet caught fire again. Influencers debated loyalty versus marketability. Old teammates of Beckham's began speaking out, not to attack Mbappé, but to defend what they called real football. Commentators drew comparisons, charted numbers, analyzed passion. Fans posted clips of Beckham's grit, his red cards, his tireless crosses into the box, a reminder that behind the glitz had always been grit. The clash wasn't just generational, it was philosophically in the background. Mbappé kept scoring, but for the first time, people weren't just watching his goals, they were watching his reactions, because Beckham wasn't chasing relevancy, was redefining it. Beckham's silence became a language of its own. Each appearance, each interview, each carefully chosen sentence created a rhythm. It wasn't about volume, it was about presence. And presence, Beckham had learned, was its own form of pressure. Mbappé began to feel it, not in interviews or headlines, but in shadows, in commentary that used his name to define contrast, in highlight reels that ended not with goals, but with raised eyebrows. The more he scored, the more it seemed people were looking beyond the net. And Beckham, he didn't flinch. A collaboration with a vintage sportswear brand emerged. The campaign tagline read, "Legacy isn't loud, it echoes." The internet took it as a message. Mbappe's fans called it passive-aggressive. Beckham's supporters called it perfect timing. What no one could deny was that the narrative was shifting. Then came the charity match. It wasn't supposed to be a showdown, just a celebrity-studded exhibition in Miami. Beckham was honorary captain. Mbappé made a surprise appearance, vacationing in the area. They shook hands, cameras flashed, social media exploded. For 10 minutes, they shared the same pitch. Beckham in loafers and a rolled-up dress shirt, and Mbappé in full kit, playing half-speed, but still untouchable. At one point, Beckham intercepted a lazy pass and flicked it toward goal. Mbappé laughed. The crowd cheered. The moment was golden. But then came the post-match. A reporter asked Mbappé about Beckham's presence. He smiled, paused, and said, "Legends make guest appearances. I'm still writing my script." It was elegant, it was clever, and it was Internet took sides again. Commentators dissected every word. Was it admiration or a subtle jab? Beckham didn't respond. He didn't need to be, because just days later, an old video resurfaced. A clip from 2003, Beckham, post-match, bloodied and bruised, walking off without complaint after 90 brutal minutes in La Liga. No theatrics, no smiles, just a nod and a stare into the lens. The caption reads, "Some write scripts, others leave scars." The clip hit millions overnight. It was never uploaded by Beckham. He didn't have to touch it. Then came something unexpected. An interview with Zidane. When asked about modern football icons, he paused, then said, "Some players want to be symbols. Others already are." The host asked if he meant Beckham. Zidane didn't confirm, he just smiled, and the silence was louder than a headline from Mbappé. The narrative was becoming heavier. He hadn't slipped, he hadn't failed, but he had become questioned. That, in his world, was its own kind of injury. On Beckham, he didn't move because in a world spinning faster every day, stillness became power. It was never a rivalry in the traditional sense. There were no fouls, no red cards, no title races between them. But in the quiet spaces of global football, the Mbappé Beckham tension had become unavoidable. Journalists leaned in, clubs paid attention, brands calculated positioning, because this wasn't about two players. It was about legacy versus immediacy, the long arc of time versus the instant hit of influence, and both men knew it. That's when Beckham made his boldest move. He launched a new foundation, not just a charity, but a leadership initiative. It was aimed at young footballers in underserved communities. The name, The Lineage Project, its tagline, "Greatness is what you pass down." No one said Mbappé's name. They didn't have to. The entire structure of the initiative was seen as a contrast to the hyper-individualism of modern football. It became global in a week. Former players posted videos of support. Legends like Cantona and Pirlo voiced admiration. Even journalists who once questioned Beckham's substance now praised the clarity of his mission. Mbappé, meanwhile, posted a series of stunning performances, including a Champions League hat-trick that had pundits calling him untouchable again. But the noise around him had changed. He was no longer framed as simply brilliant, he was framed as brilliant, in defiance of something. And then came the interview that tipped the balance. Mbappé sat down with a popular European host, and addressed the elephant in the room. I respect what Beckham has done, truly, but it's not my path. I'm not here to be remembered like someone else. I'm here to be remembered like myself, whilst honest. And it was sharp. The host asked if he felt misunderstood. Mbappé answered, sometimes I think people don't want me to be modern. They want me to be nostalgic. But I was born in this era. I live in it. I'm not chasing ghosts. The clip went viral, but instead of igniting criticism, it opened a new conversation. Younger fans rallied around him. Commentators debated whether football's obsession with history was stifling the present. TikTok creators stitched Beckham's old clips with Mbappé's interviews, asking viewers to choose past or future. Suddenly, the football discourse wasn't just about goals, it was about time. Beckham didn't comment, but Lineage doubled its funding. A scholarship program was announced in South America. A new mural appeared overnight in East London. Two figures, one looking back, one looking forward. Neither was named, but everyone knew who they were. In silence, the narrative spoke louder than ever. It ended where it began, with a moment, not a laugh this time, but a look. The Champions League final, Wembley, PSG versus Manchester City, the entire world watching. The narrative wasn't just about silverware, it was about legacy. On the sidelines, Beckham, part owner of the host club, seated alongside dignitaries and legends. On the pitch, Mbappé carrying the weight, not only of a team, but of a conversation that had outgrown him. The game was brutal, fast, unforgiving. City pressed with machine-like precision. PSG responded with instinct and flair. Mbappé was dazzling, a goal, an assist, and 90 minutes of relentless motion. But the camera kept finding Beckham, expressionless, focused, present. And with seconds left, PSG was awarded a free kick just outside the box. Mbappé stepped up. Beckham didn't move. The stadium held its breath. Mbappé shot the ball curved down, missed by inches. The final whistle blew. City won. Mbappé collapsed to his knees. Beckham stood, not to gloat, not to cheer, just to walk quietly down the steps and out of the frame. But the story didn't end there. In the locker room, reporters waited. Mbappé didn't speak. No posts, no quotes, just silence. For someone whose every moment had been broadcast, this absence was louder than any statement. The next morning, a photo appeared on Beckham's Instagram. My vintage football boot, mud-stained, worn out, captioned, "Nothing lasts, but some things echo." It wasn't a taunt. It was a truth, and maybe even a gesture of respect. Later that week, Mbappé was seen training in silence, focused, sharp, no entourage, no branding, just football, just the ball, and the boots. He wasn't broken. He was tuned, because the lesson hadn't been about winning. It had been about weight, the weight of meaning, the weight of legacy. And somewhere in that shift, something had realigned. Fans began seeing it too. The conversations changed. They weren't comparing anymore. They were connecting. Legacy wasn't a crown. It was a chain, passed on, link by link. Beckham didn't return to the spotlight. He disappeared again, but this time, with the quiet knowledge that the baton had been handed, not forced. And Mbappé, he no longer needed to prove anything. He had heard the echo want. He had answered it, because, in the end, they weren't enemies. They were echoes, one whispering forward, one echoing back.